Hey, my team, how are you doing? We are incredibly lucky to have European Tour coach Hugh Marr here. Hugh is a coach of many, many players on tour, like Beef Johnson, like Martin Keimer, and many more, and is really a mainstay on the European Tour. So we're incredibly lucky to have him here. So welcome, Hugh.
Thanks, Ben. Nice to see you.
It's great to have you here. Hopefully you're surviving. You've just come out of your 14-day quarantine after getting back from Dubai. You've survived that okay, have you?
Yeah. My wife and I are still talking, and I'm still relatively sane, or I'm no more insane than I was before I started.
So
now
we've
now we've got to put up with lockdown.
Yeah, exactly right. Oh well. That's where digital coaching comes into it, and you can access the world through Skillest.
Correct. Yes. Thank God for Skillest.
Exactly. So we're really lucky to have Hugh involved now. We only met a few weeks ago, but I mean, I've known about Hugh for a very long time. But Hugh, what I'd love you to do is sort of talk about yourself, because I think your philosophy around coaching is slightly different to someone who's hyper technical and thinks that it's all about perfect swings and things like that. You've got a very well-rounded sort of attitude towards coaching.
Yeah, well, nice of you to say. Effectively, as you mentioned, I coach on European PGA Tours. Amongst other roles within the game, I mentor guys that work for me. I do a little bit of performance coaching in business, so I've got a number of different hats that I wear as a coach. But all of this was driven by my career coaching golf, which has been it's been a fascinating journey. And as you say, I think I do view the game slightly differently to most, but I think a large part of that is driven by the fact that my business model is different to the majority of coaches, and that if players don't play well, not only do I not earn any money, I'm out of pocket for the expenses I've paid to be at events. So it's my coaching has to be immediately effective. So I'm always looking to identify, right, well, how can I make this player better now? I don't have the luxury of being able to say to a player, listen, Beef, we're going to have to take 3 months to get better at this, because ultimately that 3 months could end up being a year, which ends up with a player losing his card. So I think a lot of my attitude, my philosophy, my framework, my methodology is driven by the fact that it's driven by my circumstance. In that I have to constantly be evolving to match that player's needs where they are in space and time. And I'm very fortunate. I've been able to spend 30 years of my life doing something that I'm passionate about, working with the best players in the game, and having the opportunity not just to help them play better golf, but also learn from them and learn from the other great coaches that work around the world.
Yeah. So I just want to touch on one thing that you said there, which I find must be so hard as an elite coach on tour, is that you're trying to make big changes with your students and with your players, but you want it to feel incremental to them, I would imagine, so that it doesn't feel like something that they can never go and work with or play with. So it has to be incremental in feel, but it has to change results hugely.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you break down my coaching process, it's very, very data-driven. I'm not going to risk a player's career on my opinion. I want to know, with each and every player on an ongoing basis, where is the low-hanging fruit? Where can I get the biggest gain for the least pain, which I call, in my coaching terminology is painless gains. And I'm constantly looking to find those little wins everywhere. And the best way to do that is to continually be analyzing the player's output, to look at I use the stats on both PGA and European tours. I also have different stats programs that I encourage players to use as well, just to break certain elements of the game down more. But yeah, you're absolutely right that ultimately the goal isn't always obvious for players. And if the goal's not obvious, the journey to get there is even harder to identify. So I need to base it on something. It needs to be something a little bit more objective. And I like to think, maybe misguidedly, but I like to think that I've been I've been a little bit of a pioneer in driving this sort of data driven, objective based coaching philosophy. But it stood me in decent stead just now, or it stood me in decent stead up until this point, and I don't see any reason why why to change it. And I also don't understand why more people aren't basing coaching on something a little bit more tangible rather than opinion, subjectivity. But back to your point about making this incremental. If you have this painless gains approach, if you're looking for the low hanging fruit on a constant basis, you're always able to find where you can make the smallest win with the least pain or the least effort. That helps you break the bigger goal of becoming a better player down into more manageable bite-sized chunks.
And that always comes by assessing someone's stats and really looking at what part of their game and really, really narrowing down even like to really, really, really tight sort of ratios of how far from the green, like from 20 metres from the green, from 30 metres from the green, from 40 metres from the green. Is that what you mean by like really going in terms of finding that low hanging fruit and assessing that stuff? Or are you talking about like technical stuff that's like deep in their golf swing and stuff like that? So, because I see that you like the way you talk about yourself is that you're a performance coach, really.
Yeah,
aren't you?
well,
like you're not. Like
the truth is, Baden, we're all performance coaches. If as coaches, and it doesn't matter whether you're at the local driving range teaching total beginners or you're on PGA Tour coaching major winners, if you're not affecting the performance, then you probably need to get the hell out of there. Every one of us is a performance coach, and I guess it's quite a nice story to sell. Well, look, I'm a performance coach, but the reality is, if you're not affecting performance, then you're not a coach. Yeah. So it's fundamental to what we all do in the industry is affecting performance, hopefully for the better.
Yeah.
But when we go back to using data to support a player's improvement, basically a professional golfer has a very simple measure of how good they are, and they produce it every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's their output. And I view the stats basically as a more detailed breakdown of their output. Once you become adept at understanding stats, you can start to, it leads you to ask better questions of the player. So you can start to understand where something breaks down, because it may not be mechanical, it may be psychological, it may be driven by their last three hole scoring average is poor because they don't eat and drink properly. It's basically a start point for discussion. That I see this as a trend in your game. Let's talk about it and figure out why this is happening. So suddenly say, no, Karen.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, so what is the most common mistake that you see? Like, what is something that you would, probably the average person probably couldn't believe that the average tour player does not see in their game, or it has oversight in?
There actually isn't one answer to that question, right? Because we're all golfers, so we understand how emotionally and intellectually wrapped up in our game we become. So you literally can't see the wood from the trees when it comes to your own golf game. So I've got all these well-established systems that I apply to every one of my players, yet I can't for the life of me apply it to my game because I'm so emotionally attached to it. I think in terms of common myths that we see in the game of golf, the importance of chipping is generally overrated by your average player. Just being good enough.
When you say the average player, you're talking about at the elite level, average player at the elite level.
We're talking about the game of golf. We're talking about club players. Too much emphasis is put on having to have an exceptional short game. The reality is, if you're going to be really good at this game, you need to be a very effective driver. So whether that is the super effective, Dustin Johnson, who's both long and reasonably straight, or whether it's average length, fairly straight or whether it's short and very straight, you have to be an effective driver, because that will then open up the opportunity to access greens and regulation, access flag positions. So there are certain key parameters or certain key stats that if you don't satisfy these as a professional golfer, you're not going to be a professional golfer for very long. So what I call effective driving being the single most important thing. Generally, the tee to green stats are more important. What a player does tee to green is more important than what they do around the green. But that neglects that neglects the, if you like, the almost the emotional importance of a good short game, where having the ability to chip it close, roll in the putt, maintain momentum when you're playing well, or stop the rot when you're playing poorly. So while there may not be a statistical importance in chipping, there is the intellectual, emotional importance in that part of your game. So I've become a bit of a geek over the years for understanding stats, and also once you've identified what the player needs or what area the player needs to get better at, then the process to identify how we're going to do that. What is it that breaks down? Is it purely mechanics? Is it left to right wind I'm really poor in? Is it I don't like hitting up tee shots that are uphill? Poor examples, but you can't just take the stat and go, we need to improve that. The stat's there to identify the area for improvement, and you then start the conversation from that point.
And just to like dive into that a little bit deeper. So once you do identify something, and obviously this is a case by case thing. Like if someone's got a highly flawed technique and they can't execute something, you're going to go into that, right? But if they have just not really ever known how to practice it properly, or they just don't even realize it's a problem in their game, and all you need to do is, make them aware of it. Do you, you'll set out a plan for them, will you? And say, okay, this is how you do this, and this is how many times you need to practice, and this is what I expect to see from you. Or like, how does it look from that moment once you isolate?
It depends very much on the player, Ben. That some players respond incredibly well to structure. Some people respond incredibly well just to flat out instruction. Do this many times, this often, and let's see where it goes. That's where if you like, the art of coaching overtakes the science. It's all very well having all this information and having an idea of how you're going to or what tools you're going to use to address it. But fundamentally, you then need to be a great coach on top of it to get the very best out of the player and to get the player to act and improve on that given area.
And in your time on tour, I had a great chat with Sean Foley the other day on the phone, and Sean was just saying like his evolution as a coach from when he was 20 and he was trying to really prove himself, and he's like, really sort of pushing people around and totally changing golf swings. And then during his 30s, that probably changed a little bit. And by the time now he's 47 or 8 or something like that, he said that by the time he gets to 5 or 60, students will probably be, or his clients will be saying to him, hey, do you reckon you could have a look at my golf swing at some stage? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because now it's all about management. It's just all about helping people with their mindset, understanding their games and things like that. Is that sort of a similar path, do you think, that you've taken?
Interestingly, I think there is quite a significant cultural difference between the US and Europe, in that there is certainly specific parts of Europe Northern Europe, Scandinavians tend to have more emphasis on good technique being the most significant part of a player's improvement. And I think a lot of this is driven by the collegiate system, where effectively your coach doesn't give a monkey's how you score 68, but you're going to score 68. And the coaching that is by and large delivered in the collegiate system is all about improving your ability to get it round a golf course. So, and I can't remember, I think it was Peter Costas that said it years ago, that the mini tours are full of great looking golf swings that hit funny shots, and the PGA Tour is full of funny looking golf swings that hit great shots.
Yeah.
You can only measure technique by output. End of story. You cannot measure the quality of a golf swing by what it looks like on camera. Because this 100%. Is an outcome-based game. End of. When it comes down to performance and performance coaching, if that player can get the desired outcome, that one moment in time, he's got effective technique.
Yeah, if it's repeatable and working, that's everything. So, and do you think you've always thought that way, or have you become even more that way? Like as you, because I know, like I think as a young coach, like when I was younger, pretty much the natural progression is that you believe teaching to be standing on a mat and fixing golf swings all day long, pretty much. Like it's almost that's what.
And don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong, for a golf swing to be effective, there will need to be a large amount of technical input or technical practice.
Yeah.
And this is where it's important that for some reason in this sport, we love pigeonholing people and we love sort of polarizing approaches to the game of golf. Please don't misunderstand me. Great technique is fundamental to playing great golf. It is not possible to play great golf without it. I'm choosing to measure great technique in a different way to most.
Yep.
Can you produce the outcome you want when you want it? That's great technique.
Yep. No, it's right.
And this is where you talk about the sort of Foley's journey and it coming around full circle. Well, if you look back to John Jacobs, so we're talking late 60s, probably early 70s when he wrote Practical Golf, everything he coached was about improving impact. Everything was based around impact, which is where my relationship with technology came from, in that if output is the only measure of a good golf swing, I need to measure that. So I've got the luxury of being able to use TrackMan or GC Quad or there's no end of great pieces of technology to help. But if I can measure impact, I then know exactly what characteristic of that impact needs to improve for the player to get better. So the model, if you like, my impact model or my golf swing technique model is driven solely by impact. The great thing about this is that I've almost got my own bullshit filter here, in that if I advocate a change to a player and I don't see a change in the data, then it's not the right change for that player.
That's great.
But fundamentally, impact tells you everything. If you're not impacting impact as a coach, you're not doing your job. My job is to make your impact more predictable, more repeatable, more desirable. End of story.
And you measure that impact through ball and club data specifically. Do you ever use 3D stuff with bodies and things like that? And then
I mean,
correlate.
I've had a long 20+ year relationship with Mark Bull, who I think he's the leader in biomechanic 3D analysis in golf. So you can measure everything, but that doesn't mean that you need to measure everything. It's finding the most relevant measurement for that player. 100%. And sometimes I would call that secondary use of technology, and the primary use of technology is, let's take a traditional club player example. They don't hit down on the ball enough when the ball's on the ground, and they don't get enough shaft lean.
Yeah.
So straight away, I can use launch angle of attack. I can use spin loft. There's a number of different parameters I could use to measure that person's progress. But I know specifically that every intervention I make, if it does not change one of those characteristics, it's not the right intervention.
Yeah.
Now, it could be that merely talking about that with a player, getting them to understand what that looks and feels like, is enough for them to improve. It could be that we need to introduce some drills or some training aids to help them with that. Or it could be that this is someone who's very movement focused. It could be that getting them in front of a really good 3D guy helps them make the move that will deliver the club like that. But still, it has to be geared around changing that impact in a desirable manner for that player. That make sense?
Yeah. 100%. Absolutely 100%. Yeah, no, I absolutely love that as a heuristic, really. I think that's really, really good. So let's have a quick chat about, I want to sort of peel back the layer on tour life a little bit for a tour coach, like someone like yourself. Right? So I think that, we look at guys like Sean Foley, or you look at Chris Como, and they're, striding up and down the range at, tours, events all around the world, and it looks super glamorous and all that sort of stuff. But do you want to give us a little bit of an insight into how fragile it can be as well. Like that, you know, your players are incredibly volatile at times, not yours specifically, but tour players can be. That, you know, the business model can be changing all the time. Sometimes you don't even agree to something with someone and they play for 2 weeks with you and then disappear. And can you sort of just give us like day to day of what it's like to be a tour coach?
I mean, in terms of the actual work, it's the difference is that any impact you have has to be more immediate. And of all the numerous reasons a player will fire a coach, generally not keeping on top of a technique or avoiding working on something is probably one of the top reasons for coach firings. In terms of the life, the things I love about it are the things that are challenging, in that I love the fact that by and large you're on your own. I love the fact that your success is down to how good you are. It's that turns me on. But equally, it can be a very lonely place when things aren't going well. It's, as you say, that the tour life is constantly evolving. The one thing you know about tour life is that something's going to change tomorrow, and probably 2 or 3 things are going to change tomorrow. Whether it's players firing caddies, caddies firing players, coaches and caddies, managers and players. I mean, it's just this ever moving, ever evolving little ecosystem. It certainly isn't glamorous. I defy anyone to say that coaching on tour is glamorous when you're waiting at the front door of the hotel for the 6th night in a row for your Deliveroo. It's the hours are very long. It's 97% of a fairly mundane life, and then you've got 3% of absolute panic, where you just need to have an intervention with a player to get them playing well. You're not. You talked about the sort of perception of what golf coaching looks like. That you stand on mats and you change golf swings. That's just such a tiny percentage of what I do. And an awful lot of the time, you're stood at the back of the range watching a player saying nothing. You're literally just watching him practice. So I find that it's almost a difficult question for me to answer. I don't know why, but it's always going to be a challenging environment because you're now working at the top of the mountain. You're working with the cream of the crop, and everything is, as I've alluded to before, everything is that little bit more urgent and a little bit more immediate, because in 2 days' time, they're going to go stick a tee in the ground and they're fighting for a living again against 140 other guys or girls who are doing the same thing. It's obviously a very ruthless environment from that perspective. But you're still coaching golf. You're still doing what you'd be doing at a range. It's just under probably a little bit more duress, and you need to get slightly more immediate results.
And you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, right? And if it is too personal, but can you talk to us about your business model? Because I think that it's, for me, because I've taught some, obviously in Australia at a lower level. I've taught, a bunch of touring professionals, and a lot of people expect stuff for free, and then you work with them for a couple of weeks thinking that something's going to happen in terms of some contract. I think especially when you're young, you're probably quite naive. But like, how do you run your business? Like, how do you ensure that you get remunerated?
This business model is really simple. I charge a percentage for everything they earn on the golf course. So whether they finish 50th or whether they finish 5th or whether they win, I charge same percentage to every player. And I pay all my own expenses. That's basically the guts of the model. There are some subtleties to that, but by and large, I'm working on that basis, and I'll be at somewhere in normal times between 22 and 28 events a year.
And we've got a bunch of young aspiring tour coaches that are on Skillest at the moment. They're teaching some very, very good young players. What would you say to them? So when someone, say a student comes to you, or a prospective student comes to you on the range and says, Hugh, I think you're the man to help me. All right, can you just come over and have a look at my chipping, have a look at this, or can we have a discussion about this? Is it a case of, happy to go and have a coffee with you, and then you sort of put some terms to them, or like how does that initial interaction happen?
First up, it's probably better to have that conversation sooner rather than later. Just because, like anything in life, poor communication is generally the cause of most resolvable issues. But generally it doesn't happen quite as you've described that often. Generally, it will be a caddy or a manager will come and just have a little poke around and see if you can have a conversation with the player. Would you be interested? All very cloak and dagger. I've got this player that I manage, and we're thinking of this, we're thinking of that. And I get the need for that, because there's a very decent chance that he's probably been working or is still working with another coach who's a decent chance he's certainly an acquaintance of mine. In a lot of instances, he's a friend of mine. So it's all done sort of fairly behind the scenes. But when I sit down with a player, it'll be like, right, well, let's just look at your data first of all. Let's talk about your golf game. Let's get your opinion on where you need to improve. Let's get your opinion on what you feel you need that you're not getting. And let's compare it to mine and see if that's a basis to start working together. If it's not, then we've had the conversation.
Great. No, that's awesome. I think because it's something I've always wondered, to be perfectly honest. Like, because when I was young and I was teaching these touring professionals, I was sort of like, this isn't for me. I think I would just prefer like teaching, good, really, really good golfers, and even like 18 handicappers that want to be figure handicappers. And I probably never explored it properly and just didn't handle it the right way. So I think that's really good advice just for young guys.
Yeah, I mean, but to be honest with you, I think there's also when you talk about aspiring coaches, and I've been quite outspoken about this over the years, that it's very difficult to aspire to coach on tour. Because ultimately it's a little like playing on tour. There's only a few positions. And I was the same to an extent. I thought, well, actually, I want to test myself with the very best players. But there are times in my career where I've thought, you know what, the last thing I want to do is test myself with the very best players, because the lack of security, the fluctuations in confidence, the fluctuations in earnings, the fluctuations in behaviors of people involved, it's very, very difficult. You got to be careful what you wish for. And it's not an environment that I think everyone is conditioned for. When you wake up on the 1st of January and you don't know when you're going to get your first paycheck for that year. But you do know that you're probably going to be 6,000 to 8,000 euros in a hole to travel to those first few events in the Middle East. It is not for everyone. It is a difficult way to earn a living. And I think the assumption is that there's almost no such thing as talent when it comes to coaching. You can turn yourself into a good coach, which I absolutely firmly disagree with that. That some people just aren't good enough to coach out there.
100%. Yeah. Well, it's a skill evolved over many, many years. And that's the thing, you actually need to be on tour long enough to evolve those skills as well, because they're very specific to tour life. So,
and the reality is, if you have been out there for 2 or 3 years and you're still only working with 1 or 2 players, there's a decent chance that there's probably not a life for you. Be careful what you wish for, man.
I think you've sufficiently scared everyone off, Hugh, so that's really good.
That's not a lame attempt to protect my business, I promise you.
No doubt. But so I have one more question for you. Okay, so this is it's been a great chat, and I really enjoyed this. Why has is Tyrrell Hatton now an incredible golfer? Why is Webb Simpson still number 8 in the world? Why, what is the difference? Like, I know why Dustin Johnson and John Rahm and like these guys have got like these tools and these weapons that are like, wow, that is like totally amazing and world class and absolutely in the top 10 in the world. How does, a guy like Tyrrell Hatton become so good? And what is the defining thing? How can someone who is, say, 110 on the US money list at the moment or on the European Tour at the moment become a top 10 on those money lists? What is that defining thing?
There ain't one. A principle that I work towards in my coaching is that if you need to be any good, you need what I call a superpower. If you want to be really, really good, you need to have another superpower underneath that corresponds with your main superpower. So Dustin Johnson, his superpower has always been the distance he drove the ball. And it became a real superpower when he learned to control shape and hit it a little bit more accurately. Now that took him close to the top of the world rankings. When he enhanced that and paired it up with a corresponding superpower of having a great wedge game, he then became the best player on the planet. Without looking at, I know Tyrrell, I've known Tyrrell since he was 15 when he was playing amateur golf. Tyrrell's superpower is that he is an incredibly good golfer. And he has absolutely not 1 ounce of quit. So while you see a lot of his histrionics on the golf course and the hand off the club, he's become almost a caricature of himself. It's funny watching Tyrrell, but he is an incredibly gifted golfer. Now, if you look at the way he drives the ball, much underrated. He's reasonably long, and he's very straight for the distance he hits it. He's also an incredible chipper, and I would call him a streaky putter. But he has a superpower. He drives it. His driving is a superpower, right? When you look at Webb Simpson, much longer than everyone thinks he is. You look at his tee to green stats, he's a striker. He's got superpowers. The challenge is that, and every coach is looking for this, what is that one thing? You use the example of what's going to make the guy that's 110 in Europe, top 10 in Europe. The reality is there's probably nothing. And as coaches, we're kidding ourselves if we think we can do that. Particularly if that player has basically lived between 90 and 110 in the rankings for 5 years. That's how good he is. Because ultimately, if I were to give you the top 100 players in the world to coach for the next 10 years, A, it would be very profitable, but B, they're all going to work with the best program for them. They're all going to put in the right amount of time for them. They're all going to manage themselves correctly. How do you know, or what would be the defining factor between number 1 and number 100? How would those rankings play out? Get down to one thing. Who would be number 1? The best player, the one with the most talent. And this is where, I don't know, is this the coaching industry that's guilty of this? Because it's probably not, maybe partly guilty, that players who perform to the best of their ability and just try and get a tiny little bit better, I have the absolute utmost respect for them. Now, it just so happens that Webb Simpson performs to the best of his ability and gets a tiny little bit better. He still maintains a position in the top 12, top 10 in the world. Now, that player, there may be another player who has exactly the same approach, who will only ever finish 100th.
Yeah.
That to me is a great career. That to me is someone who's got the very, very most out of their career. And if the talent does not exist, it doesn't matter how good a coach you are, you can't make a 100th ranked player a 10th ranked player. That's not part of the coaching remit. So
Tyrrell Hatton becoming the number 6 player in the world is not so much a case of he's found something and gone to another level. It's actually realizing his potential rather than
100%. And I think he's a great example of that. Yeah. Is he doing anything fundamentally different to 5 years ago? No, He's just got a little bit better at everything he does. Has he made a significant swing change? No. Has he changed anything in his golf life? No. He's just got a little bit better. And you could argue that he's got a little bit older. He's got a little bit more worldly wise. He's a little bit more comfortable in his surroundings. There's a million different suggestions as to why he's got better. But the reality is he's made no changes and got better. He's just picks away. Every year he gets a wee bit better in certain areas. And you know what? He's such a good competitor. He is such a good closer. That's a guy that you put in there when it matters, he will get the job done.
So I've got one more question. I know I said that was
keep going.
So how does that influence your coaching when someone who's number 110 in Europe comes to you and says, Hugh, I want to be in the top 5. I want to get onto the US. I want to get onto the US tour. And you look at his data, you go into his stats, you have a look at it, you don't know if he's got a superpower. How do you talk to that student or that client?
The way I talk to the 5th player in the world, if Tyrrell picks up the phone today, I talk to him exactly the same way. Where's the low-hanging fruit? Where's the painless gains? Because the reality is that you can only get the best out of what's put in front of you. And if you're going back to the very start of this conversation, if your approach is that incremental, let's get a little bit better at key areas on an ongoing basis, then you'll find out how good you could be.
Yeah.
And as I said, that is why my approach isn't particularly flexible to start, because I need to know, right, well, actually, there's going to be an area. There's very few players that are just okay at everything. So there's going to be an area where we can make a significant gain. If we can make a significant gain there, then that'll probably open up areas for more gain. But that incremental, I use it. I've got a racehorse analogy that I use, that you've got 2 horses in a race. One of them is a performance horse and one of them is a development horse. And those 2 horses have to run side by side as much as possible through a player's career. We don't want to put so much emphasis on development that performance suffers. We don't want to put so much emphasis on performance that development suffers. So managing those 2 horses over a career, and my means of managing the horses is to always be looking for those painless gains. Where can we make little gains all the time? Constantly pick away. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Yeah. Just, yes, there's a big goal, but the process of achieving that goal is to break it down into those bite-sized chunks. And I use, you're familiar with Jenga, the game with the wooden blocks. Absolutely. So golf coaching is basically a massive game of Jenga with someone's career at stake. How do you win a game of Jenga? You pull out the easiest block every time, right? You pull out the wrong block, you take the high-risk block, the whole lot can come crashing down.
Yeah.
But if you've got that almost sort of Kaizen type attitude of, right, well, let's keep polishing the diamond and finding those little areas for incremental improvement, then you've got a pretty decent pathway for any player to get better. And it doesn't necessarily apply only to a tour pro. This applies to a 13 handicapper looking to become a 12 handicapper. Yeah, a 12 handicapper looking to become an 11.
And where do you think storytelling comes into that? Like I would say so what I do, I teach in an academy. Obviously, Skillest keeps me incredibly busy, but I do 2 days a week, and I still love it, Hugh. Like I love helping people and getting their games better. But I'm a storyteller. Like when I'm there, I paint the picture of what you can be in the future and what we're going to do to get you there and how it will all happen. I suppose you need someone who's willing to listen to the story and someone who's willing to come on board for a period of time as well. Because
absolutely. I mean, I'm not a believer that a player needs to get worse to get better.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that. I think that's a crappy get out clause from bad coaches back in the day. I'm not a believer that it needs to take time to see an improvement. In some instances it will, in some instances it can be immediate. I think I think you've got to be a little bit careful when you're painting a story, or when you're painting a picture for someone or telling a story, and that you don't paint something that's unattainable.
Yeah.
And again, that's where my painless gains approach wins, because you're always trying to find the simplest way for a player to get better. And then the way I guess the storytelling element of it is that I tell my stories retrospectively. So I'm able to say, well, actually, Baden, look what's happened now. This is where we started. We've done this drill with this test, and now you're here. So rather than paint a picture of what the future might look like, I'm using it to reinforce why the past has worked. Does that make sense?
100%. That's awesome, Hugh.
Because there's definitely a part of the art of great coaching is that storytelling, is painting the picture, but it has to be based on something, and that has to be there to complement your coaching skills, rather than be viewed as, if you're just a cheerleader. Yeah. All you've got is what I would call a cheerleader type coach, and there is a need for it for the right person. Please don't misunderstand me. But the cheerleader type coach is generally, with the average golfer, is generally there to make the pupil feel better about not playing any better. It's a coaching skill. It's not what you base your entire coaching life around.
That's great, Hugh. Thanks for your insights. This has been a really, really cool sort of 40 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, that 15 minutes didn't really work out, did it?
Just went out the window. And to be perfectly honest, we could probably keep going. But let's wrap it up. It's just been absolutely fantastic chatting to the coach of your caliber, getting the insights, and so many of the coaches that will listen to this will no doubt have really appreciated those nuggets of wisdom. So thank you so much.
No, pleasure. Happy to be involved, and good luck with Skillest. You've got a hell of a platform there that is certainly these days providing coaches with a much needed opportunity to earn a living.
It's been a fun ride. So great to have you involved. So if any student out there is listening to this, you can learn from Hugh right now on Skillest. But otherwise, we'll catch you next time.